This is what we get when we have two committees at the same time. So, Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Blanton. Representative Cantrell. Representative Fisher.
Here.
Representative Goot. Representative Heverin.
Present in the room.
Representative Imes.
Here.
Representative Cook.
Here.
Representative Derek Lewis.
Here.
Representative Meeks. Representative Miller.
Present in the room.
Representative Moser. Representative Nemus. Representative Scott.
Present in my annex office.
Thank you. Representative Weber. Representative Wheatley.
Here.
Representative Scott Lewis.
Present.
Representative Bratcher.
Here. Okay, thank you guys for being here. This is the fifth meeting of the House Elections, Constitutional Amendments, and Intergovernmental Affairs Committee, and it's called to order. And please turn off your please turn on your microphones when you're talking, because we have a KET audience today, and they want to hear how you vote. And please remember to silence your phones. And this is the point where I silence mine, because we don't want that to happen. First off, Senator Pro Tem Givens, if you'll approach. We'll start off with Senate Bill 181. Just say your name and title, and the floor is yours, sir. Thank you for being here.
Chair Bratcher, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be in front of you today. First time for me in front of this committee, and I do appreciate that. Senator David Givens, 9th Senate District, here to present Senate Bill 181 for your consideration. This is companion legislation that runs alongside House Bill 4. House Bill 4 was the Speaker's constitutional amendment that came over to the Senate. He and I worked together on that legislation in the Senate to refine it some, and in the midst of working through the conversation on House Bill 4, that constitutional amendment that permits us to return to session when the need arises, it became apparent that we could do the best work for the people by separating that constitutional amendment into a companion piece of legislation that you have in front of you here, Senate Bill 181, while continuing on the path with House Bill 4. The key change that you're going to see in the constitutional amendment that's also reflected in this companion legislation, and the goal of which is to give us the most power with the least danger. And that's a fine line to walk. But it became apparent that if we wrote the date, if we continue to maintain the date certain of the end of March and April the 15th in the Constitution, we were restricting the power of future General Assemblies. So what you see before you in Senate Bill 181 tries to thread that needle in the ways that I've mentioned. I call it a responsive government piece of legislation, and would be glad to walk through it very briefly and then certainly entertain any questions. You can see the language in the bill. It addresses the odd-numbered years first, then it addresses the even-numbered years, maintaining, and this language is still in House Bill 4, so as you see it here in the companion legislation, don't be concerned that we've dropped the 30 and the 60 out of the Constitution, because they're still there. This just reaffirms it in statute. Should we reconvene upon proclamation, which is also in that language of House Bill 4, should we reconvene for 12 additional days? This prescribes how those days may be used. It also clarifies about unpaid veto recesses. Now, when you get into sub 4, paragraph 4, what you're going to see there is us having to define the interim. As we move down this path of moving from the constitutional constructs into a statutory construct, we have to define some things we previously have not defined. And so interim period comes up in that conversation. The one thing that initially my reaction was, I don't know if I like that or not. But after lots of meetings, bipartisan meetings with members of the House and the Senate, this concept of keeping a bill alive on through the calendar was something that was very intriguing. If it's a good issue and it's a good bill, it's going to continue to survive in committee. If it's not, it'll just languish in committee. Now, understand what that means. We're still going to have what we consider the regular session. It's going to end date certain, as you see here in the statutory language. But the bills that are in committee as that regular session ends will continue to exist until the end of the year. That's what we're addressing in paragraph 5. You'll see there in paragraph 6, we're making certain nothing applies to an extraordinary session as called by the governor. So the governor still has the authority to call us in for sole issues, sole matters, and for us to work on those. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'll be glad to address any questions. I have said in my presentations, both in Senate committee and on the Senate floor, that in my years of being here in the General Assembly, this may be the most substantial, lasting piece of legislation. This bill, along with House Bill 4, the constitutional amendment, tries to move us as legislators to a truly co-equal branch of government level. And I pause there to make one more brief statement. Think about what we've tried to do with House Bill 1, Senate Bill 1, Senate Bill 2, reactionary pieces of legislation that are trying to forecast what the future looks like and how we can put constraints, valid constraints that I agree with, but constraints on the executive branch. This would prevent us from having to do that sort of future-sighted, unknown impact legislation, because we'd have the ability to come back in those rare circumstances and address those needs without legislation of which we just can't know the impact of going forward.
I have a motion and a second and a question, Joe.
Thank you, Senator, for this bill and for the consideration of House Bill 4, its companion. My question is, the whole point of House Bill 4 was to increase the authority of the legislative branch by staggering the available legislative days throughout the year. This particular bill reinstates the ending dates for each session. Why did we do that if the whole point of the constitutional amendment was to stagger those days throughout the year?
Great question. And I would have to take a look back at all my notes on House Bill 4 to be absolutely certain that what I'm telling you is the reasoning. But I'm going to share with you, based on the conversations we had in that dynamic, and we had about 5 meetings. We had Democrats, Republicans, House members, Senate members engaged in that. It became apparent that members liked the rigor of a calendar and date certains. But at the same time, we didn't want to prescribe that in the Constitution. We wanted to put it into the statutory language. But what we did put into the Constitution to address those concerns about us just moving the calendar all over the place is we put in a requirement that there be a 3/5 majority to move the end date of the regular sessions. And again, we're trying to thread that needle of meeting the needs of calendar certain, time certain, and Representative, you and all of us here know that without date deadlines, we sometimes don't function the best. We're motivated by dates. I think we are.
You'd have December 31st as your ultimate date.
We would have that. Members took a lot of comfort in knowing a calendar that seemed to keep us still as part-time legislators. And that was the other fascinating conversation. How do we maintain that balance of being citizens and legislators at the same time who are not so driven, and I know everyone's committed to this place, but thankfully we have that citizen legislator role, and the goal is still to keep that. So that's the reason that we arrived at the approach we did.
Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator, for bringing this bill. And I too am kind of forgetting some of the things that are in Senate Bill 4, but the first question I have...
House Bill 4. Yeah.
I'm sorry, House Bill 4, because it left the House in one way and came back in another way. However, I've had a couple conversations with the Speaker. I really have enjoyed getting into the nuts and bolts of the institution and what's trying to be accomplished here. And I don't think I had a chance to ask him about this question. So during the time that in the interim, when the the bills, legislation are still available at some point, interim committee hearings or any kind of interim I'll say action, but when these bills are discussed during the interim, they can be. I mean, there could be full committee hearings. It would be for discussion only. That's correct, right?
That is correct. And that's why it was so important that we prescribed the word interim and what it meant. And so until the president and the speaker jointly call us back to exercise some of those 12 days, then the committees can meet in the interim, do the normal interim work. But once that proclamation has happened for us to return, the committees become live again, for lack of a better term.
I'm sorry if I can follow up. Yeah. So once the proclamation, that takes a 3/5 vote for the proclamation to come back, committees can become live. We are basically back to session days, I guess I think it's up to 12 days that are available and a max of 4 in a week, from what I recall. With legislation that is prior to proclamation being passed, we will have the ability to hear testimony about legislation, and I just want to be sure that things like you can't refile bills, you can't do amendments, you can't committee subs, none of that will be available. It'll just be all for discussion only.
Representative Wheatley, I want to answer as accurately as I can, and so let me back up to something you said earlier in your statement, and I did not want to interrupt you, so that's why I let you finish. Understand the 3/5. I don't want anyone to misinterpret what the language and the effort is. So the 3/5 does not apply except in circumstances of when we try to move the end date of the regular session. There's no longer in the language of House Bill 4 or this language that relates to 3/5 to return. The ability to return is now going to be by joint proclamation of the Speaker and the President. Those two alone jointly proclaim the Senate and the House shall reconvene. The General Assembly shall come back into session for 1 day, 2 days, whatever we may need to finish bills that are in the process or to move bills through. The reason we arrived at 12 days was so we could do 5 and 1 for veto override and 5 and 1 for another veto override should that need arise. Now, the way committees work, we're still in that interim, and I hesitate to say this with certainty, but as we left it, and I think it is in the bill, and I've just rushed over from the Senate floor, the proclamation can only be for up to a 2-week period. This was the discussion we had. So we could proclaim by the proclamation of those two that we're coming back to session, and then committees could start meeting and acting on bills they had in their possession. But again, there's no way to get a bill into your possession until the General Assembly convenes and assigns a bill to a committee, and there's really no way a committee could then vote a bill out. But until the General Assembly reconvened to accept that report, the bill is still in the possession of the committee.
Thank you for that, and that was great clarification. One little final point on this. So when we, in the 30-day year that we are in session, the 60-day year we're in session, we could have bills that are basically on the orders of the day. The session would end because they just never been called. And then when we pick back up, will those bills be on the orders of the day when we pick back up when the session starts again?
So great question, and I'm going to fall back on the years I've been here and the way that a bill actually, it always helps me to picture a bill physically moving through space. So wherever that bill is at the end of that day, that's where the bill is. It's either in possession of the Rules Committee or possession of the Committee on Committees or in the possession of one of these committees, one of our other committees. So wherever the bill is at that point in time, that's where it will be. If it were passed over on the orders of the day and retained in the Rules Committee, it would still be in the possession of the Rules Committee. If it's in the Rules Committee, the committee like this could not act on it. We'd have to convene, move it out of rules back to a committee. What I would suggest we as managers of the floor and the body would want to do is we'd want to make sure that all bills were cleaned off of rules and pushed back either into the Committee on Committees or preferably back to one of these committees of jurisdiction.
And a lot of the rules creation would answer a lot of those questions. Any other discussions? I think this is a wonderful bill. I'm a big advocate for legislative independence. I did a plug when House Bill 4 was here for the LRC. They have a great video on the history of legislative independence. I mean, there was a time when the governors picked the leaders of the Senate and the House. I mean, we've come a long way, and I think we were hampered by the cutoff dates of the first 4 months or 3 months, depending on the year. So I think that this would be great if we can get this accomplished.
Chairman, one more brief thing if I
Sure.
could, and I'm sorry to interrupt the flow because I'm excited about this committee moving on through the work I know that you've got to do. But should this pass and should that constitutional amendment make it to the ballot, I'm going to be leaning in a very positive way on each of us to be ambassadors, because we're going to have folks in the grocery store or at the ball game coming up and saying, what does this do? Do you support it? Is it good? And for us to achieve this goal, we're going to need everyone being ambassadors for this legislation. Now, very likely you will see this bill back again next session, and that's purposeful. We may introduce the bill in the very same way and vote it again to help spotlight and shine the effort on the goal of passing House Bill 4. If there's any refining that needs to happen, we can certainly do it. My goal is for us to pass it now, so it's there alongside House Bill 4 in that space of conversation. But we're going to need a very positive marketing, messaging effort to succeed in this endeavor. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Senator. Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Blanton.
Aye.
Representative Cantrell.
Mr. Chair, may I explain my vote, please?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to cast and explain a no vote, and it's nothing against you, Senator Givens. You've done a great job of explaining the bill. I voted against the underlying bill, the constitutional amendment, House Bill 4, and I did that understanding that there are pros and cons to this. And one of my concerns is that, and I'm getting into some weird territory with what I'm about to say, predicting what voters are going to do. I don't have a lot of confidence that the voters are going to pass this amendment, but I do feel like I have some evidence for that, because the voters did not ratify the amendment that was on our most recent ballot giving judges longer terms. And I think giving us more days in the legislature reinforces this perception that maybe the voters would be giving us more power. I don't know that I necessarily believe that, but I do think that will be a concern of the voters, and that this ultimately is not going to be needed, because it's ultimately not going to end up being a part of our Constitution. So I'm going to vote no.
Representative Fisher.
Yes.
Representative Gooch. Representative Heverin.
Yes.
Representative Imes.
Yes.
Representative Cook.
Yes.
Representative Derek Lewis.
Yes.
Representative Scott Lewis.
Yes.
Representative Meeks. Representative Miller.
Yes.
Representative Moser. Representative Nemus.
Yes.
Representative Scott.
No.
Representative Weber.
9.
Representative Wheatley.
Briefly explain. I'm going to pass it this time. I'm intrigued by a lot of things here, and I'm hoping we have more conversations. I share some of the concerns. I know that this was the Speaker's bill prior to the current COVID situation, so there are some positive things here related to the institution, which I do like. So I'm going to pass it this time.
Representative Bratcher.
Yes. And I believe that's good. Senate Bill 181 passes. And the same shall be sent with favorable expression to the House, or the House floor, yes.
Yes.
So thank you, sir.
Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for your consideration. If I can address any concerns, I'm glad to do it. Hopefully we can get this done. Thank you.
Okay, we have some more Senate leadership here today. Robert Stivers, the president of the Senate. Just state your name and title, and the floor is yours, sir. We're before us will be Senate Bill 228.
Thank you, Mr. President, or Mr. Chair. Robert Stivers, State Senator for the 25th Senate District, and also the President of the Kentucky State Senate. to members of the committee and the chair, this issue has been one that has been thought about, and actually I think the floor leader in the House was thinking of this at the same time I was. So what this does, and this is a mix of federal and state constitution, I'm going to go into the federal constitution right now, in that the federal constitution, when there is a House seat that becomes vacant, there is a special election, and that is defined by the federal constitution and something that we really can't touch. The other part is the United States Senate, that if there is a vacancy there, we can prescribe how it is to be done. Historically, and a lot of people don't know this, but since I'm getting pretty old, I have a little bit more historical perspective. Historically, used to the Senate, the state Senate, used to pick your United States Senator. As I see Representative Nemus putting thumbs down, you all have the power of the budget and revenue raising. We have confirmation powers and appointment powers. This is one of the distinctions that the framers of our Constitution put in there. But I think it was the 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution that changed all that. But if you think about that process, you actually got elected by the state Senate to be your state's United States Senator. That is no longer the way it is, but we get to prescribe the method for which a governor can replace a vacancy. A lot of people ask, well, what was this about? Is this about Senator McConnell? Is he retiring? He's leaving? Let me make this definitive statement. He is not sick. He is not leaving, maybe to some people's chagrin, but he plans to be there because I asked him about this and said, if I file this, people will question, why am I filing this? Has nothing to do with anybody potentially leaving. When I asked about the purpose of this bill, he looked at me and said, I think it's appropriate and I like what it does. And if you think about 2 years ago when Senator Paul was injured by his neighbor, something could have happened there that, God forbid that somebody has to leave because of health, but that happens. Some people just get tired of being where they are. And so this set up a mechanism, and it was kind of interesting, the comment that I'm not sure, and people have said, well, you're doing this because the current governor. No, I think when it was brought to my attention, I wish this had been in place 2 years ago, because I'm not so sure I'd want the former governor having unfettered discretion to pick the replacement. So what this bill does is it sets up a process. And if you think about the past election, the people elected a Republican to be their representative in the United States Senate. 20 years ago, it was Wendell Ford. And so actually Wendell Ford got to the United States Senate through a vacancy where he resigned, if I'm not badly mistaken on my historical perspective, he resigned Julian Carroll, the former state senator, former governor, former Speaker of the House, then ascended to the governorship and appointed Wendell Ford to be the United States Senator, because there was no protocols around what you had to do. So what this does, this sets up a process that the party of the individual, and if there is no party, then it would come from independent, libertarian, whatever that individual who was currently in that seat held, to be replaced, and it sets up the mechanism for them to be replaced. If it was a Democrat, the Democrat Party would nominate 3 people. Republican would set up 3 nominations, 3 potential nominees for the governor to pick, and the governor would pick that replacement. The critical part of this is when you think about the dynamics that are currently in the United States Senate and all that goes on, we didn't feel it was appropriate to wait 60, 90, 180 days for the state of Kentucky not to have a voice waiting through an electoral process. So put somebody in place. The second component of this is get an election as quick as possible, not giving the power of incumbency to in any way entrench itself any more than it could. So it sets up 3 processes for when and how the election should be. All of them set based on, like this year, we have a broad time, and we are also cognizant of the fact of the cost of elections. They are expensive. We tried to put it in the framework of how the current electoral process works, but understand there is no election this year. So we set up the process through all. Each person who wished to run could file if they got the requisite signatures. You would then have what's called an open primary. If no one person gets 50% of the vote, then the top two vote getters, similar to what happened in Georgia. It could be two Democrats, it could be two Republicans, it could be a Democrat and a Republican, it could be an independent, two independents, people without party affiliation. The top two vote getters would then go to a second runoff election. All of this is done in a fashion that is as quick as possible to make sure the person who is elected fills the unexpired term for which they are seeking and creates the shortest possible time that a person could develop that incumbency factor in an electoral process. So that is an explanation of the bill. If there are any questions, I would gladly try to answer them.
Do I hear a motion? Motion? And a second. Any discussion? Representative Miller.
Thank you for bringing this, Mr. President. This is intriguing and how you work that out. I actually like that. I have a question though. I think the text we're replacing was passed in the early 40s, like 1942. That set up the process.
Yeah,
and I think wasn't Earl Clements that appointed himself. Because that was Lawrence
there have
Weatherby.
Been things like that happen.
Yeah, Lawrence Weatherby became the governor, and who was from Middletown, Representative Nemes. And but what was the process between the passage of the 17th Amendment in 1913 and 1942?
I think the states, if there was a vacancy,
yes, sir.
I think the state Senate then voted for the replacement, and I'm going to have to look at my resident historian. No, but if there was a vacancy that occurred. It was a gubernatorial appointment. Okay, gubernatorial appointment. I'm not that in depth on the history of 1913. I wasn't born then,
freak.
But
thank you, sir.
Yes, Representative Heverin reminds me that my children are older than her quite often.
Any questions? Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Blanton.
Aye.
Representative Cantrell. Representative Fisher.
Yes.
Representative Gooch. Representative Heverin.
Yes.
Representative Imes.
Yes.
Representative Cook.
Yes.
Representative Derek Lewis.
Yes.
Representative Scott Lewis.
Yes.
Representative Meeks. Representative Miller.
Yes.
Representative Moser. Representative Nemes.
Yes.
Representative Scott.
No.
Thank you. Representative Weber.
Yes.
Representative Wheatley.
No.
Representative Bratcher.
Yes. And Representative Gooch is here. So Senate Bill 228 passes with favorable expression. The same shall pass in the House floor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's always a pleasure to come visit the House.
Good to see you. One more bill, the great Senator Jimmy Higdon. Now, you've been here several times before.
I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jimmy Higdon, State Senator from the 14th Senatorial District. Last year, or earlier this year, when we had the county board elections, each county board is to submit names to the State Board of Elections. Each party is to submit, and right now they're making them submit 5 names for the Board of Elections to select one. And typically, what county boards are doing is just sending 4 people that won't serve and 1 person that will. So this bill just says we're going to send 1 person from each party, the parties at the local level for their local county board of elections. They're going to send in 1 name to the board of elections. That board of elections can refuse that name or ask for another name, but it simplifies the process. Also, it adds in there, Mr. Chairman, after this election, there's a lot of stuff going on about elections, a lot of things that people liked about our past election, especially the in-person early voting. And I started working on an election bill, but it soon got very, very. It was a whole lot going on with what people wanted. So I did file a bill as current resolution 75 that created a task force to look at elections during the interim. But the Senate doesn't do much with task force. So there was 2 main factors that, and I knew Representative Decker passed a very good elections bill out of the House. It's in the Senate now. But there were 2 primary things that I thought needed to be addressed in case another election bill didn't get through. And one of those was a lot of concerns about the wireless connections to our voting. We shouldn't call them machines because they're not machines anymore, but our voting equipment. And so this bill just says that there's not to be any of our voting equipment connected to the internet. And the other thing I think is very important is that we have in our statute that all votes should be recorded on a paper ballot. And the reason it's important to get that in place now, county clerks are as we speak, looking at voting equipment, voting software, and they need to know that this is in statute, that they shall not buy anything that doesn't produce a paper ballot that can be used in case of a recount. And there's a minimal fiscal note with this because we're not requiring everybody to buy new machines. This simply says when a county buys new machines, that they're to buy machines that produce a paper ballot. And that's my bill, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Senator. Do I hear a motion? Hear a motion and a second. So the Senate Bill 63 is before us. Representative Cantrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Higdon. I do plan to support this, so don't take this question and take it in the way it's intended. My question is about the machines that are capable of being put onto a network. I think a lot of our machines are capable of that right now, and part of that is linked to, I think, the amount of time it takes to get the results on election night. And I guess my question is, if you're not able to do that, and I know we need to safeguard that, and I totally understand that's why that's in this bill, but is it going to result in a delay of reporting results on election night once we get back to reporting results on a regular election night?
Well, one thing, that was very good, Representative Cantrell, very good question. And one of the things that I have discovered in talking to all my county clerks, one thing that came out of this, the primary, everybody wants to know who won on election night. So I don't want to do anything in this bill that would delay that. So we have another year. We'll be back in session again before we have another round of elections, and we can change it then after the county clerks have time to digest this. And anything that they find wrong with it, I'm willing to work with them to change it.
I think that's very thoughtful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Blanton.
Aye.
Representative Cantrell. Yes. Representative Fisher.
Yes.
Representative Gooch. Representative Heverin.
Yes.
Representative Imes.
Yes.
Representative Cook.
Yes.
Representative Derek Lewis.
Yes.
Representative Scott Lewis.
Yes.
Representative Meeks. Representative Miller.
Yes.
Representative Moser. Representative Nemus.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to explain my vote, please.
Okay.
The this does two things. Senator Hickman, thank you for bringing this. You're my second favorite senator. my favorite's named Mike. I think the second thing this does is very good. I've not been able to talk to my county clerks about this, but I'm going to vote no today, and the reason is because I think we make the local county boards of elections submit 5 names to the state board of elections, and I think that's a control on the integrity of local elections. My concern is that a county clerk and a sheriff, and then there's a Republican and a Democrat on each of these boards. As you know, there are 4-member boards. My concern is that they may submit the one name being a brother or a cousin or the next door neighbor of the county clerk, thereby not allowing us to have the proper controls on local elections. So I might not be a no on the floor. I need to think about it some more. But as of today, I think that provision may infuse a little bit of, or may remove a little bit of that integrity control. So I'll be no today, but I thank you for bringing this bill.
Representative Scott.
Pass.
Representative Weber.
Yes.
Representative Wheatley.
I'm going to briefly explain my yes vote. I certainly hope that this is taken care of through House Bill 574. I know the other part of it related to the county board elections. Appreciate you reaching out to them, and it's very important that they're involved in it. Maybe even input from the state board of elections. I want to talk to them a little bit more about it, but I'm a yes for now.
Representative Bratcher.
Yes. Senate Bill 63 passes with favorable expression that the same shall pass on the House floor. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members of the committee, thank you. And blessings to each of you for the next 3.5 days.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.